Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I am the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MOAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. I want to acknowledge the challenging circumstances that still remain, even as our spaces begin to open up and expand. MOAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter in recognizing and condemning white supremacy and the ongoing systemic violence against Black people. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Andre Hill, Daunte Wright, Ma'Khia Bryant, and we grieve for so many others who have lost their lives at the hand of state-sanctioned violence, including those whose names we do not know. We want to acknowledge that MOAD's commitment to racial justice is ongoing, and as such, we will continue to say their names to hold space and honor these victims. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. With deep respect, MOAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on unceded native lands and thank the Ramaytush and Chochenyo Ohlone people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations and continue to do so today. I want to welcome you to our revival of the program series Community Resilience, where we address issues salient to Black people throughout the Bay and beyond during this pandemic. Today, we have an incredible group of experts to discuss COVID-19 vaccinations and the Black community. In the interest of time, I will give brief introductions to our panel, and I will put their full bios in the chat. Today we have with us Dr. Malcolm John. He is a professor of medicine in the Division of Infectious Diseases at UCSF. He launched the UCSF Black Health Initiative in 2020 to help UCSF be a better partner with the Black community in order to address COVID-19 and related disparities. Joining him is Shakirah Simley, Executive Director at the Booker T. Washington Community Service Center in San Francisco. She is the daughter of a social worker and granddaughter of a Black Panther. Rivka Louissant is an Oakland-based mixed media visual artist, writer, educator, performer, and community organizer. She is inspired by the movements of the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, the Brown Berets, the Cuban Revolution, the May 1968 student movements, and the African Liberation Movement. And moderating today's discussion is Dr. Sheryl Davis. She is the Executive Director of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. She launched Mega Black SF, a collective of Black stakeholders fighting for visibility, sovereignty, and justice for Black San Franciscans. So please join me in welcoming our illustrious panel, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Davis, to begin the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It is always a pleasure to be, too bad we're not in the actual physical space at MOAD, to be surrounded by the beautiful art, but to be in spirit, to be in the presence of MOAD and the intent of that space. I am super grateful to be here with Rivka, with Shakirah, with Dr. John. I will appreciate and respect your title.
Malcolm is fine.
Malcolm. And it's an interesting place to be, right? Like I know, I don't know, Shakirah, I feel like I should check, is your mom on with us this time? Because I know last time we were on, there was somebody saying how amazing you were, and you were like, oh my gosh, this is my mom. But I think to be in this space,
I can't say, but maybe next time.
To be in this space, you know, a year after so much of the work that many of us have launched to raise profiles and to recognize and to really draw attention to the fact that what we see right now is not new. It is a new form of what we've experienced and what we've dealt with. And it's also allowed, I would say, in a lot of ways, to advance and to move some things that we've wanted to maybe see happen. And so I think the question that I have for each of you as we kind of move through this space is like, what are the targeted strategies, right? What has over the last year plus provided first the impetus to be like, okay, let's do this, but also allowed a little bit more grace to be intentional in some way, right? To say that we need to highlight and focus and support and prioritize Black folks, right? So there's the targeted strategies for Black folks, but then also the targeted approach to center Black folks that typically folks would not have been okay for us to do. So I would just, let's start with, Rivka, let's start with you, right? Like, what are some targeted strategies? What have you been able to do? What do you think is working, or that you are grateful to be able to pilot even right now?
Yeah, thank you. I think what I've noticed with the COVID pandemic specifically is that it highlighted a lot of the contradictions that already existed within the system when it comes to Black folks, right? Because when we think about issues of like access to healthcare, those are things that we've been dealing with for so long. That has been part of the Black struggle for so long, access to healthcare, adequate healthcare. So I think in approaching this this pandemic, or like just the sheer devastation of it, and trying to basically educate people so that they can make informed decision, is to also understand that we're already approaching things that are building on top of things that are already existing, and that they're not coming from thin air, as you're saying, Dr. Davis. I would say, like, something that's been very successful is allowing people the time and place to like appreciate what they have to say and acknowledge their legitimate concerns around these issues that are already going on, and the fear that they have over being taken advantage of by the system that has taken advantage of our bodies day in and day out. And I think being able to acknowledge that the fear that they have is real and is rooted in material reality and can be proven, I think that has been very successful for me.
I really appreciate, like, I'm just trying to write down some of what you were saying, just in terms of like acknowledging the fear, right? And the time and place to actually appreciate, right, what folks have already been experiencing, but that we couldn't really freely communicate, or that it wasn't heard before, right? And now at least it's being amplified. And then this idea of highlighting the contradictions. And so I want to go to Shakirah, but Malcolm, I just think about like those contradictions and really this health aspect of it too, right? Like the work that you're doing, and just the contradiction of it all. And I would say, Shakirah, having worked with you throughout a lot of this, the contradictions and the conflict even, right, between communities, between the warring between even oneself of, do I want to get the vaccine? Like, do I want to do this? Like, what's historically happened? The contradiction about like this thing being good for you, and at the same time, not trusting that anybody is doing anything that's good for you, right? And that in some ways, right, and I think you can speak to a lot of this in terms of targeted strategies. In some ways, it's been more about the fact that if you don't take care of you, it could impact somebody else. So really, it's not about me, right? It's really about the fact that folks who don't look like me may be worse off, right? So that contradiction about like, I care about you, but only when it impacts me. And so I know you've been dealing a lot with that, Shakirah. So would love, what are the targeted strategies? What are the things that you, in this kind of this contradiction of self, that folks are dealing with in some way?
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis, and thank you so much for the MOAD for having us here today. I think that's an excellent question, and I think, Black folks, we live at intersections, and there's not going to be a silver bullet solution that's going to solve all of our problems. And we're also like nothing for us without us. And I think what, the targeted strategy that's been really encouraging and exciting for me in the pandemic has been the collaboration and connection of different Black communities across San Francisco who have decided to work together across neighborhoods, across generations to tackle the pandemic. and also to raise awareness, resources, space, difficult conversations on all the other things that our community needs. And I'm looking at our participants on the call today, and I'm seeing, Ms. Felicia from OMI, I'm seeing Maurice here, I'm seeing John Henry from both sides of the conversation, Mr. Bennett from Bayview. I'm seeing all these different folks who have been in this. We've been in this knee deep for over 20 months. And the saving grace in all of this is that, we know ourselves better than anyone. We have each other's backs. And the only thing that's going to save us is us. So trust us and center our leadership and our voices and our expertise. That's going to save us, right? Because we all we got. So I think that's been, the targeted strategy that's been most encouraging for me. And I'm really grateful for Mega Black and the Mega Black COVID Task Force who have come together to help lead this work on behalf of our communities.
Yeah, I mean, Malcolm, just before you go, I mean, I think that's the other thing, Shakirah, as you talk about across neighborhoods, across generations, even across like these different spaces and places. And I wonder, Malcolm, as we talk about health and wellness and we talk about vaccine, and you can't get vaccinated under 12, but we've got boosters available for our seniors, and what are these targeted approaches and across neighborhoods, what that looks like. Because I think about, like, I see Susan Murphy on, or Tino from SCDC, and when we talk about our neighborhoods and this intersectionality and connecting to folks, or you think about even John Henry, who's doing a lot to elevate and give platform to these conversations. I know he's been working with Brittany Doyle, who you work with, Malcolm, that we really do have to have in our targeted approaches. It's not just about Black people, right? But that even across Black folks, like, where do they live? How are they accessing services? What are the ages? What are the kind of the things that keep people from that? And as you're doing this work, are you seeing that it differs across ages and across neighborhoods and across spaces? And, what is this targeted approach or strategy that maybe doesn't just fit? Even that approach has to be modified.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, Mega Black, you always say we're not monolithic, we're megalithic. And I think the solutions have to be the same. I've been able to go into Dr. Chan's court within a court for some of our youth in the juvenile system. And some of the concerns they have are very different than what some of our older folks are dealing with. And so, they've grown up in the era of social media. And if it's on social media, it's real, right? And I've also done some groups, some webinars at Booker T. And basically, I just recall one gentleman saying, you get the vaccine and you get magnetized. I saw it on social media. And I'm like, well, do you know some folks who are vaccinated? Why don't you go up and do the experiment yourself? And go, well, it's on social media, so it's real. And I, as someone who wasn't born into social media, but graduated into it, we have to take a step back and be humble and understand that different people's experiences influence their thinking and their concerns. And I think the one thing I've learned about this pandemic is humility on both sides, right? It's really, we don't know a lot, we need to listen. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson from the health system, is that finally people are learning to listen to community and to really center Black voices in our partnering, and to be in the room and to share opinions, but we don't have to be the loudest voice and we don't have to be the first to speak. And it's really important to be a trusted messenger, to really, our goal is to bring back Black UCSF to Black San Francisco, like all the trainees and faculty and staff who aren't as involved as they could be. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity, but it's really also important to partner with people who are already trusted. We're partnering with Shakirah at Booker T. We've partnered with the San Francisco African American Faith-Based Coalition, so the Black churches. And that has been really important, and partnered with those who personally went through COVID or got vaccinated, and partnered and centered with them around testifying what their experiences were like. So I think that's really important. I think it's important to confront and address deep historical traumas that the medical system has invoked, whether it's Dr. Sims, Tuskegee, or forced sterilization. Those things are important, I think to overcome that, we have to be transparent with our data. I always tell folks, my job is not to convince you one way or the other. I think people can make good decisions when they have the right information. They'll come to the decision that's right for them. And if they don't want to be vaccinated, well, what other ways can you protect yourself and your loved ones? You know, maybe get tested more frequently, maybe wear that mask, maybe be more selective on which events you're going to go to. And I think that that's really critical. And then lastly, I think you've said it, and many others have said it, is connecting with the core values of our community, which is Black Lives Matter. You know, we matter. You know, a lot of the success of this country has been off of and on of the backs of Black people. We deserve to benefit from it. We deserve to have a seat at the table. You may choose not to eat the meal right now, but we deserve to be at the table. And I think that's really important for people to grasp and appreciate because, and I'll end here for a minute, just to think about two things. The 1918 flu pandemic, when we were not allowed in white hospitals, it's the NAACP and the Black nurses that worked in our communities to really heal and take care of ourselves. We know how to take care of ourselves. And when the polio vaccine came, it was Black scientists at Tuskegee who had the HeLa cells, the Black woman cell line, not taken with her permission, granted, but you know, that really developed that tool that the Salk vaccine was tested in, and Black activists, Black scientists, Black health workers fought for getting Black children in that field trial by the March of Dimes, where 1.8 million children went and got that vaccine. It was tested in only a few thousand people, but they fought for that right. And so we know how to take care of ourselves. We need to be at the table. We always have that tension of appropriate distrust, caution, appropriate, but also knowing we have to take care of ourselves. And it may not be fair that we have to always do that, but that's the world we live in. And we have historically been able to do that. And I have faith in our community, so.
No, I appreciate that. And you know, you talk about at the table and eating and all of that. It just makes me think, you know, Shakirah, this other space in place around historical trauma that Malcolm is talking about, right? Like, so part of this has been food sovereignty, right? Or the conversation around who gets to eat, right? And that you're asking me to make these really, again, the contradiction that Rivka talked about, like these contradictions about like, get the vaccine, but I'm hungry, right? And so how are we prioritizing, how are we having this conversation? And I think one of the things that you did early on was the strategy around food or connecting food resources and understanding that as, you know, meeting basic needs. And I just think as we go through this process, like there's a fear that as we, you know, maybe this is something you want to say more about, that once we come out of the pandemic, that we'll also come out of the strategies to get food to the folks that have been sheltering in place, and that there's something that we need to be not losing sight of.
Absolutely, Dr. Davis. And thank you, Dr. John, for your comments too. I mean, it's COVID because the skepticism that I'm hearing from community when I'm talking to, you know, our kids at Westside or, you know, checking out our elders at the mini park in Fillmore or anything like that is like, I have been struggling where we have been at, right? And food is one of those things. And what we saw in the pandemic is that all the systems that we trusted collapsed, including our food delivery, distribution, grocery, and farming system. And in some ways, it was a bit of a reset, right? Of who do we rely on to feed us and how can we feed each other much better? And Black people have been feeding this country since before this country was a country. Our hands have always been in the lands, and in kitchens and in pots, and it's gonna be no different. And one of the things that, you know, Cesar Chavez says is like, you give someone a meal or food, you give them your heart. And I see myself as, you know, a young community leader to provide those opportunities for our folks to give them, if I'm giving you a meal, I'm giving you so much more than that. And also I might teach you how to cook, or we might, you know, rally around Black food businesses who have been disproportionately devastated by the pandemic, and making sure that they have equal opportunity to keep their doors open and hire from our communities, to support Black farmers, right? Like it's not just a shot. It's not just a shot. And I think it's really important that we dive in and we critique and think about what are the silver linings from this pandemic that's reset, that allows us to ask better questions, and how can we rebuild systems that better suit our direct needs for the Black community. And I think food is one of those places. But it's food, it's housing. The eviction moratorium is ending in a few 2 to 3 days. So I'm really worried about our folks and their ability to keep a roof over their heads. It's public transportation. It's being able to maintain and keep a job. The unemployment rate for Black African Americans in San Francisco is one of the highest. So one question that we asked, and Director Davis and I had the honor of working with Director Davis at the Human Rights Commission, working for the Office of Racial Equity, and people were talking about recovery. And we're like, well, who gets to recover? And whose recovery was never, ever questioned. And, everyone, it's like, we're never going to get back to anything, right? It's like, what does that new radically imagined future look like? And it's uncomfortable for people.
I mean, Rivka, I know you, so I just want to also put a plug, because when we talk about radical imagination and you think about this work, it's so easy for the arts to lose, right, relevance in this conversation. But there is something about the arts as a healing tool and as a space to be seen and heard, that sometimes when we go through this process, we don't center it in the same way that we do some more kind of, as you talked about, material things that that we need to do. But I know you were going to respond to Shakirah.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely wanted to respond to Shakirah and her questioning of the structure, right? Of saying, like, how are we going to get back to normal when normal wasn't good for us to begin with? And to think about the fact that there's such a large lack of access to public healthcare in the working class community, and that most Black people tend to be working class. There's also like lack of access to primary care for Black people, which is oftentimes lead to things like comorbidity, which leads to Black people dying more from COVID. And also like the thing of food desert that you all were talking about, how this is all very systemic and part of the structure. And it does feel like a infrastructure issue. Like these things need to be implemented into the community to be self-sustainable. And to go back to the art and how it can be a tool to kind of promote these knowledge, these questions, these conversation, these action, is also thinking about art as being a tool. And this is what I try to do with my work, and thinking about as a Black woman, as an immigrant woman, a child of immigrant in this country, as a part of the diaspora, as a working class person, how can I use my platform to talk about the everyday thing that we deal with in this system, right? Because I know for a fact that these institutions, the art gallery, is not made for people like me to access. So how do I as an artist who's within those institutions, use these tools to amplify the voices of the masses of people that look like us in this panel today? So I feel like it is a strive and a struggle sometimes, especially when you have a lot of you need to focus more on like different individual stuff. But I think at the end of the day, it is by realizing the real contradiction again that happens in the system, and the fact that me not talking about these things is like the only people that are losing are us, right? Me not talking about it is not empowering me. And so I do look at these issues and like program like this as the driving force to create the work that I do.
I want to piggyback a little bit on what has been said. I think we have to rethink what has happened. There's going to be a new future. And, I want to say in much the way that we learned about hyperlocal testing, outreach, and vaccine opportunities, it is about hyper-local, holistic wellness outreach. And I want to give a credit to Shakirah and Booker T and their plan to really have a mobile wellness outreach in the community. And we are partnering with them with our BHI Healthy Streets model that Brittany Doyle and Wise Health partnered with us and helped develop. And it's really this whole thing of like mind, body, soul, right? We have a spirituality table with the Faith-Based Coalition and mental health, quite frankly, tied right next to that behavioral, the Black behavioral leaders in the Bay Area who participate with us on that. We also have a table, I think, Sheryl, you came to our food table where we have like recipes, our comfort food recipes with healthy ingredients and other ways to eat well. We have a heart body table that focuses on cholesterol, blood pressure, diabetes screening with the Black Nurses Association. Again, not partnering with others. A lifestyle section where we're really focused not only on sexual health and exercise, but we also have UCSF coming out to do answer questions about technology and health and give information about our workforce opportunities. It's a small contribution to a much larger problem, but it's the least that the second biggest employer in the city can do to create and support the wonderful initiative that Shakirah and her group is trying to do. And I think that sense of hyper-local wellness outreach is the future. Really not asking people to come to us, but us going to people. I think that's going to be really critical. And lastly, I just love the conversation that all of you, Shakirah, Kivka, and others are saying here. It is about bridging across silos. I think one of the things that we learned about this pandemic is a lot of collaboratives were formed, both because of this and Black Lives Matter. And these collaboratives are doing some amazing work, including the one that you spearhead, of course, Mega Black. And there's still an opportunity, I think, of these collaboratives working together in their own spheres around common issues. I always sit back and say, we're talking about universal income. Okay, universal income could help people with food. Universal income can help people with crime. Universal income can help people actually with their health. And each of us, if we were all prioritizing and strategizing together, and that was one of the unifying themes in our own spheres, we could be advocating for this and providing outcomes for something like this to justify ongoing sustenance. And that's just came off the top of my head. But there are wonderful opportunities out there that I think we can see emerge if these partnerships, if these working across silos, if groups that don't traditionally work together continue to work together. I'm excited and hopeful in that way. But as Shakirah said, it's about being vigilant with the powers that be that have the cash and hold the power. We have to be a little radical in continuing to be radical, as you all at HRC have been. Should I not have said that? I don't know. Maybe
but I would say for all of you, and then starting with you, Malcolm, this idea of like, we're here tonight to talk about community resilience, and you hit on a couple of things, right? One is about mental wellness, right? And it's very taboo, right, in the Black community to talk about your state of mind or struggling with depression or anxiety or frustration or just not feeling your full self, right? And you hit on something that I think, again, we still are trying to wrap our heads around in terms of guaranteed income or universal basic income or cash transfers, and really making this connection about having money, right? Like,
yes,
how that can help you address some of this, and like our resilience piece and taking away some of that initial like fear of my copay or no pay at all, right? Like, what are those things? And I think I would just like to ask you to say more about like the resilience and mental wellness and physical, financial wellness, but that systemic oppression has limited our ability to have either of those. And so it makes it easier to not trust the system.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's no new news that the chronic oppression in our community, the lack of opportunity, right? So generational wealth that has been denied us, right? That loans that we should have gotten a generation ago, but because you were Black, you didn't, but white folks with worse credit got. And so they bought a house, they got money, they could send their kids to nicer neighborhoods and schools and so forth. redlining, et cetera. We all know about that. But the fact is that chronic stress, right? Just chronic stress leads to both physical, meaning somatic, increases in your blood pressure, et cetera. But ultimately, the most subversive of all is the toll on our mental health and wellness.
Yeah, Dr. Davis, can I say something about the chronic stress part to piggyback off for Dr. John?
Yeah.
So it's, in some ways, I'm even, and I've actually been doing a lot of self-reflection on this too. And you and I have had conversations about like mental health and Black women, like leadership, and like, what does that mean? And like, I almost like don't want us to be resilient, because resiliency is saying how much trauma can we absorb and still be strong at the end of the day. And how many, it's like I'm a levee and that hurricane is battering against my walls until I break. And I don't want Black people to be resilient or having to have to be strong all the time. I want us to be soft. I want us to be vulnerable, because we are adaptive to the changes that are happening to us. And we're coming from a place of that's moving from resiliency and moving to something that's regenerative. Because if I regenerated, if I'm doing that, that means I already have a full well and I can recreate resources to sustain myself, right? Without having to come from a deficiency. And I would love for our community, when we're thinking about the strategies that are actually going to support us, is that adaptation, that imagination, and also coming from a more regenerative space. Like, I've gotten enough sleep, right? I've had enough good meals to eat, right? I've moisturized my skin enough, right? Like I'm coming from a place of health and of wealth. And it's actually, I've been thinking about that as far as farming and agriculture as well, right? Because you don't just want soil to be resilient, you actually want it to be regenerative, so it restores itself to create better produce, better fruits, veggies, flowers, and you build that over time, and it creates a lot of inputs that you have to put into that space. So, and people are the same way.
I love it.
So that's just my like little plug on that. I've just really been thinking about that, and really liking what Miss Lisa's saying is in the chat, as far as like, in order for us to be even resilient or regenerative, we need to be prepared. So thank you for that, Miss Lisa.
You know, I also just want to quickly say I love your framing, partly because we also know, right, that disparities and outcomes are still bad in the African-American community, no matter your socioeconomic status. We still see health disparities. You cannot educate your way out of this. You cannot, because the system, the structures that exist is the problem. Rivka is nodding her head. And so, you know, but, and so maybe, Shakirah, you're right. It's re-envisioning the solution, as you said. I'm not going to repeat it, but it was great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is I was, when you were talking, Shakirah, I was thinking about talking to someone who said, I don't want to keep taking care of everybody else. I would like to be taken care of. And so this idea of resilience is, you know, this idea that it's okay to not have it all together, right? To not have all the answers. And I think that, to your point, you know, I often laugh because you would be, you've been in meetings and you said, we're not trying to be your mammy, right? Like, we're not trying to be the Black mammy up in here trying to, you know, make sure that all the babies are fed and dressed, and, you know, and then meanwhile, then we still have to go home and take care of our own children. So I think that the challenge here, and yesterday we had a conversation, I want to bring you in on this, Rivka, too, because I am, no offense to Shakirah or Malcolm, I think that you are the younger of us on the call. And so this idea of like finding space and moving forward, and we were having a conversation yesterday with some folks around, you know, somebody was referring to young people in the schools as the babies. And somebody else said, oh, don't call them babies. That's like when, you know, we were growing up and they called Black men boys for the rest of their life. But then there's this conversation that we have to have about the inability for, when we think about Tamir Rice, when we think about for Black youth to be Black youth, right? To be carefree, to not have to be the little man of the house, or to not have to be little mama, but to be able to just be children or young people that get to be silly, right? That they're not always on point. And I think, again, to this idea where you were talking about art and the freedom to say that art is valuable and you don't have to just be, it's not just for little kids, or it's not just for, that it serves a purpose, and that we're never too old to be art, or to be artists, or to experience it.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. And especially with this notion that, you know, like little Black children don't get to enjoy their childhood, and they don't even get to be acknowledged sometimes for their capability of learning and being full human beings, right? At that age, it's either you're told, or you are either have to like grow up really fast and take on a lot of responsibility, which inadvertently what is wiring us to do is getting ready to be in a world where we're cogs in the machine. We don't get to explore ourselves. We don't get to understand who we are in relation to ourselves and the world around us. We don't get to really understand what it means to fully be humans in certain ways, because we have to take on all these different type of responsibilities, right? And I think for me, what was really important about pushing to and keeping, you know, like I've heard it all as like a young Black woman growing up and wanting to do art. Like, this is not gonna feed you. How are you gonna sustain yourself? And having to fight to be able to say, no, this is legitimate. This is something that is needed, and I have a voice, and I deserve to be able to use it in the way that I need to use it. And a lot of time I've been in an institution where there were few faces that looked like me around because they weren't afforded that opportunity. And that's where I'm talking about, like, how do you have this platform and being in this institution and saying, I'm just gonna go along with the status quo, because it's already like a gatekeeping, you know? And a lot of time people that are from a community that do get to make it in there feel like they do have to support the status quo. Paulo Freire said, Paulo Freire is a pedagogy in Brazil, and he said, from Brazil, and he said that, I'm paraphrasing, that the oppressed only has the oppressor's vision of what it is to be human, to aspire to. And so a lot of time, a lot of us propagate the idea of what we think is successful without understanding that it hurts our community and ourselves. And a lot of time we don't even get the chance to acquire the tools to be critical, explorative, and intuitive about these things, to realize that we are going against our best interests.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
No, that is extremely, that's extremely powerful. And I think there's something when you were just talking about the ability to explore ourselves and be free. And I would just offer up to all of you, that may be part of why we see this hesitation in getting vaccines, right? Because we don't want to, we have for so long been told what to do or how to function or how to move, and there's not enough freedom of choice. And folks are like, I'm not a sheep. You know, I'm doing my own thing. I'm trying to find my own way. That's why I really do appreciate earlier, Malcolm, when you said, let people decide what's best for themselves, right? Let them go through, get the answers, get the information that they need to make their own informed decision. And I think that there's not enough of that, right? Like, let me give you all that. Let me let you explore. Let me let you experiment for yourself. And I think, Rivka, that's the challenge that you've just said, like the ability, the freedom to say, this is what I want to do with my body, with my life. And I think we still are so busy fighting the slave mentality that we're like, I'm gonna just do it because I can, because I want to prove to you. It's like when I go in the store and somebody follows me around and I'm like, I'm gonna buy this. I don't even want it, but I just want to prove to you that I can buy something. And then afterwards I get it home and go, oh, shoot. But I think that we do this vaccination hesitation also is because not just because you tell me to, because you're not looking out for my best interest. So I don't know what folks think about that, but I think that may be part of this, like fighting to be free means that can I make my own decisions?
And I do want to parse out, like, there's nuance in our community. Like, there's a difference between being a straight up anti-vaxxer and vaccine hesitancy. Like, we can't just like lump everybody all together and shut people down when they have questions. And I think like our recent political discourse has really become super uncivilized, super fraught, super vitriolic, like especially on social media. And we're not able to like have people and talk to them in a way that you would if they were sitting at your kitchen table. And, you know, what has worked for me, you know, I'm a person, I'm vaccinated, you know, I run a childcare center. So like we have to be vaccinated in order to make sure that we're providing a safe and healthy environment for our kids. But when I come across that in community, it's like, well, you know, talk to me, what's going on? You know, what's happening? Why do you feel that way? What happened? What kind of information did you get? Okay, that's interesting. It just may take time. And like, we need to just spend the time with our folks. And some people, you know, had initial hesitancy because when the first vaccine conversation, to be real, came under the Trump administration's FDA, and we're like, I don't know if I trust anything from that administration, right? So, and then we had a change, right? And then we had that stuff, we had the Biden administration kind of like make sure that was rolled out across our communities. And, you know, we've been able to see the impact the impact on our economy, the impact on different industries, but we can't just leave folks behind because we disagree with them.
Absolutely.
And like this conversation has come up again, also same like last summer, we were having the same conversation last summer when like, you know, there's a lot of intergenerational ideas on like policing and creating restorative justice processes in our community.
But I do just want to say, Shakirah, as we have this, like we can have this conversation, but unfortunately the power doesn't necessarily lie with us. And so I also don't want people to be like, we told folks, go out there, do what you want to do, experiment and explore, and then they lose their jobs. Because unfortunately, this is the reality of where we are. So, I mean, I want to allow, provide space for Rivka and Malcolm to jump in, but like, this is the reality, right? We want grace. We want people to be able to do that, but the system is set up and right, we got to follow in some way, like until it's, you know, overthrown. Like this is what it is.
Go ahead, Rivka.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important. Something that you said, Malcolm, about giving the people the knowledge and information that they need so they can make the decision for themselves. If it's not vaccination, if it's like wearing masks, washing their hands, safely distancing, I think the point is to empower people to make the decision to protect themselves and their families, right? And then to go back to what you were saying, Shakirah, about people just basically like people, I think, yeah, go ahead, Michael, sorry.
No, I support the comments that have been made. And I think Sheryl's point about people like, I need to make this decision for myself, don't tell me what to do, is right. Another on point comment. I want to make clear that there is my medical opinion, which is that everyone should be vaccinated. And I could certainly go through that and explain why. And there's also the reality that medical decisions for people is more than the medical opinion, right? You can have a great interior, you know, well, I don't know if everyone has an interior designer, but you could have someone who you trust to, you know, I don't use them, but someone that you trust to help you advise you on your house, on the colors in your house, and you love them, but they say, this room should be purple. And you're like, nope, I don't like purple. Doesn't mean I don't like you. I don't think you're great. I just don't like purple. And so I understand that. And when I say these talks, I always say, get the information so you make your decisions not in a position of fear, but a position of power and strength. That is the,
Go ahead.
Like that is the key. Make your decision from a position of power and strength, not of fear. And because when we make decisions out of fear or anger, we generally make bad decisions, right? And so that's the key. And Yeah. I mean, I think that's literally the most important point that I share with people. It is not easy, but anyway, I'm going to pass back to Rivka because I know you had something else to say.
Yeah, because I lost my train of thought. But what I wanted to say was about the legitimate concerns that people were bringing up about, fertility issues, not having enough time of work if they had reactions to the vaccine, or how it might make them sick. And also, like Shakirah, you mentioned how, the vaccine was rolled out under a different administration and later by Biden. And I want to point out that even under Biden, there was no national-wide education program around the vaccine. Is still very dependent on the individual to go out and find out the different type of reason why they should be vaccinated. And because this is a global health issue, you would think that our government would put more emphasis around, we already give a lot of reason why they wouldn't do it in the first place. So it's just like, it gives us a lot of reason as Black people in this country not to trust the rollout of the vaccine. So it's really important that we have program like this one where, like you were saying, it is us who bring the messages to you, but also to empower you to go out and get your own message.
It's true.
Yeah,
I did want to just say I do agree with Dr. Davis was saying around I gotta tell folks you about to lose your job, right? Like that the society is moving forward in a way in which Black people are already on the outskirts of it, and from accessing restaurants to employment to public transportation to travel, that's something that we need to have a conversation within our community about to make sure that we're prepared and our folks can navigate that.
I mean, Malcolm, if I could, I want to just interject here and ask for additional thought, because I think the other challenge here is that because there's some questions and data in the Q&A about the stats of folks who have been negatively impacted by the vaccine. And this is one of those challenges where when we talk about this and we understand that all medicine doesn't impact everyone the same way. And I think about when I was growing up, everybody was getting peanut butter and jelly, right, for lunch. And then all of a sudden there were all these massive peanut butter allergies, right? Nut butter. And all of a sudden, something that was so mainstay when I was going to school, now you can't bring peanut butter to lunch because there might be somebody. And so there are these things that we know we can't explain. And I think those are the challenges that we go through with this. And I don't know what the data is, Malcolm, that talks about what percentage of folks are negatively impacted by the vaccine as opposed to those who are not, but that we know that there are different things that impact folks. And that's why I say the other piece of this is how do we get the information to people, right? Because we're battling with a lot of different pieces and we don't always know how to respond when somebody's somebody else got, paralyzed, but then we also are battling with people's narrative around Nicki Minaj's post, right? That went viral and there was all this backlash for. So there's so much in all of this to unpack. And I don't know what the response is.
I mean, the short response is that the vaccines comparatively are very safe. I mean, honestly, one public health official said this, and I really say it's true. People prayed for a miracle and we got 3. There is no way we thought that we would have vaccines so effective and with relatively low side effects. Is it 0 side effects? No. But we're talking about, 1 to 12 per million, depending on the side effect. I mean, and everybody's risk threshold is their own. So maybe, 5 cases per million is too high for you. That, I'm not here to tell you your own decisions. But to Shakirah's point, things are moving forward. And we just have to give context to some of these risks. Obviously, the risks come out. Now, let's take a step back. Let me just take a step back. Is it unreasonable for someone to say, there's a new vaccine and I would like to wait a year or 2 to see how it shakes out? No, no, of course not. That is completely reasonable, right? But the problem is the pandemic ain't waiting for us. So it's a tough decision that some people find themselves in. And I will say that if ever you're going to maybe bend your rule or maybe think a little bit differently, this might be that time. This is for the history books. It's not a footnote in history, right? It's a chapter in history, right? So this will be remembered forever. And so if, a lot of people have talked to me like, oh, I only do holistics, I don't believe in Western medicine. I'm like, great. Do you ever go to the hospital? Do you ever see a Western doctor? Oh, well, I have for this or that. Well, maybe this might be one of those times to revisit Western medicine, because it's a rock and a hard place for many. This is the most challenging time. I don't know anyone will experience a more challenging sort of environmental situation in our lifetimes. We won't, right? It's a once in a lifetime event, hopefully. So I want to appreciate listening to people who are having a difficult time with this process, because it is the most difficult of times. Pre-existing conditions have only gotten worse. Black and Latino people have lost more jobs. They have fallen more into food insecurity, and they have experienced more mental health disease during this time. And our children have had less access to virtual education, or successful access to virtual education, than any others. This is the reality. And we have to find our way out of this in a way that re-envisions the future to the betterment of our people. And that means we're going to have to make some tough choices.
So before we go to Rivka, and Rivka, you write it down so you don't forget your train of thought there. The question about, do we know which one, is there one that's less harmful? I'm like, man, I should have got the other one. I got the C grade instead of the A grade. I don't know, like, is there one that is less harmful? And then, I think that's the piece that we've got to figure out on this other end. Like, I was on one of those, I don't know how I ended up in one of the hashtags about like the opposite side of the folks who are being negatively impacted. Like, there's a whole movement to highlight the people who haven't, who didn't respond well to the vaccine. So, that scientific piece, like, is there somewhere other than social media that folks can go to better understand?
The CDC tracks these adverse events, and obviously scientific journals that I access, whether it's the New England Journal of Medicine, Journal Watch, et cetera. But the CDC does track, and there's a vaccine, the vaccine side effect monitoring, and I'm blanking on that one, but you can find it through the CDC. All this data is on their website. And I would say the two mRNA vaccines are very similar, no real difference in side effects. The J&J, we all have heard about the concern about that vaccine for clots in women of a certain age and less so in men. And again, those risks, if you do the comparative risk, right? Let's just talk about the clots that got a lot of publicity, right? So it ended up being roughly in the high risk group, 12 per million, in the highest risk group, something like that, 12 to 15. And 1 in 3,000 women on birth control will get a clot. That's a conversation you should hear about when you take birth control. Much different. And if you get COVID, about 1 in 2,000, little less than that, will die of COVID if you actually get it. So as Shakirah said, we live in a world where everything is magnified, and every concern, and there is a movement for everything. There's the anti-vaxxer movement, the hesitant and the pro-vaccinator movements. And this is why trusted messengers have to come out with the real data and answer people's questions and concerns. These vaccines are relatively safe. There's nothing in life is free. So is it 100% safe? No. Is 12 per million too high for you? I can't speak for you. I can't speak for you on that.
I know we are close to our time. I want to get Rivka in and then see if you each have. And then the last question, Dr. Johns, and we can go on. Dr. John didn't want to put that S on there. If we'll find out and maybe get to Elizabeth so she can share. There was another question, but we'll come back to it if we have time, around, do we know how many Black people were in the initial testing? And so I want to get Rivka in before we go back to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to contextualize this talk of vaccine or no vaccine kind of discussion we're having, especially when this is the MOAD, right? The Museum of African Diaspora, and understanding that right now the global South is basically starving for access to the vaccine, while the richest country of the world are hoarding more than they need for their people. So we have to understand that in comparison of whether or not we want to have it. While there are countries out there, just to contextualize this in a global sense, right? There are countries out there who would love to have access to this technology to be able to save their people. But because of patent, because of capitalism, because of all these rules, are not able to have access to it. While the richest countries of the world have 10, 12 times more than the doses that they need for their people. And some of them are even being wasted because some of us don't want to have access to it because of, again, the lack of preparedness that they did to get the masses ready to be able to accept this change.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Riv. Thank you for bringing up that point. Because when we say Black, we are also talking about the diaspora. And what does that look like for our family across the globe? So thank you.
Well, I don't know if you all have a parting, and I also just wanted to.
I just want to answer that last question though. 10% of the initial study participants were Black or African American in the mRNA studies. In the J&J trial, because it was a global trial, it was 50% when you take everybody in consideration, roughly.
Great. Thank you for that.
Thanks. I did want to uplift what Dr. John had brought up earlier in the call. So here at Booker T, we're working with our partners in the Fillmore community. We're working with Collective Impact, Magic. We're also working with New Leadership Community Foundation to launch our Fillmore Feel Well wellness initiative. And it's for us to go directly to community and provide holistic support. Whether it be meals, whether it be, conversations around substance abuse, mental health, Black maternal health, and we'll be rolling this out over the next year. We're really excited to start this work here in October. We started with Westside Courts and moving through there. So I'm excited to work with Brittany Doyle from Westside, from Wise Health, and Dr. John to launch this, and also have Black medical professionals will be there to answer community questions, not just about COVID and the vaccine, but also about other health questions that folks may have if you don't have access to a primary care provider. So like I said, we can save ourselves. That's all we've ever done. And I'm really grateful for everyone on the call today and all the participants who are already doing the work in community, who showed up today. Let's keep working together. So thank you.
Thank you, Shakirah. Anyone else want to say? Malcolm waved. I don't know, Rivka, if you all want to say anything more before we say our parting words. I didn't get a chance to, we'll save that for another time, the conversation around radical obedience. I don't know where I'm at with that one, John Henry. That sound like love and obey. I'm like a little bit worried about that language. We're going to have another conversation, both sides of the conversation about that one.
I want to say thank you to everyone on this panel. I always learn a lot, and thank you to those on the call. It's great that thank you for your questions and for listening. I read your article, Dare to Dream, Sheryl. I didn't read it before. It's great, love it. And Rivka, it was a real pleasure to meet you. And that was a very powerful statement you made about the global need, and really needs to be. We are in a land of riches and a land of oppression, which is a very strange paradox of the United States. But, my family's from the West Indies. I had to deal with my parents being there and not getting the vaccine. And fortunately now we have them here and they're vaccinated, and I feel much better. But again, I just want to say to those who have concerns, we support you. We are here as a resource for you. Reach out to me if you want with any questions or concerns. We're not here to leave anybody behind. And yeah, just, we're here. I'm here. So thank you.
Thank you all. And thank you all so much for joining with us today. And thank you, LaShawn. We definitely will try and follow up with Clinic by the Bay. And I know Tammy and other folks were on with us. So thank you all so much for joining. And thank you, Elizabeth, and to MOAD for this opportunity to share.
Thank you all so much for this incredibly informative and important conversation. And I hope that we can all take heed of how we can work together to keep everyone safe and healthy and to have a truly equitable recovery, and not go back to the status quo, but to a new beginning. I also want to thank Cal Humanities for providing support for MOAD's virtual programs. Funding for today's program has been provided by California Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. I'm also thrilled to announce that MOAD will be reopening to the public for the first time since March of 2020 next month. We'll have a members preview day on October 20th with our public opening on October 21st and a free community day for everyone on Saturday, October 23rd. We'll be opening with 5 new exhibitions. So please go online to moadsf.org to register to visit the museum. I'd also appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to fill out an online survey about today's program. We love to hear your feedback. The survey should pop up after you leave the program, and I also put the link in the chat. And if you're so moved, please consider supporting MOAD in any way that works for you. We appreciate everyone joining us today and would love for you to support the museum, visit, be part of our MOAD family. So thank you all so much, and I appreciate everything each one of you are doing to move forward and support the Black community in the Bay Area and beyond. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe, everybody.